Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 169, The Sports Tavern. Now, this is something different, something unique, and something that I hope to do a couple of times a year. This is the inaugural episode of The Sports Tavern, so there are a few tweaks that I will make as I bring new episodes to you, but in a nutshell, I've invited the hosts of 3 other sports history podcasts. Together, we will talk about players who we think belong in the Hall of Fame, players who might be in the Hall, and we debate whether or not we think they deserve to be there. Revisionist history, what if, a true-false segment, and a couple of other discussion points as well. Of course, we won't get to each segment in each show, but in the spirit of discussing sports history, we will all learn nuggets about stars from the past, nuggets that we might have forgotten or just didn't know. Now, before we dive into today's show, a couple of reminders. Please follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on X at SportsFHeroes. Look for the Sports Forgotten Heroes page on Facebook, and wherever it is you are watching or listening, please give Sports Forgotten Heroes a like, a follow, and subscribe. Also, I want to mention that my first book, College All-Stars versus NFL Champions, is now available, and you can order it on Amazon or from McFarlandBooks.com, the publisher. If you are a football fan, a sports fan in general, I really think you'll enjoy this look back at one of the most unique events in sports history. A game that several thought was the second most important date on the NFL calendar, the Chicago Charities College Football All-Star Game. Again, you can get a copy of the book on Amazon or McFarlandBooks.com, the publisher. And if you'd like a signed copy, please reach out to me at sportsfh.info@gmail.com. I will help make those arrangements, and of course, as always, I thank you for your support. Okay, let's get into today's show, my first episode of The Sports Tavern. Welcome to the first ever Sports Forgotten Heroes Sports Tavern show, and this is really exciting. I'm glad I have my guests here today, and I hope to do this twice a year. I think this is going to be a really cool thing where we all get together for some sports tavern talk, only it concentrates on sports history, not about yesterday's game or tonight's game or tomorrow's game. It's about sports history, something all of us, what I like to call sports nerds, love. And joining me today are Tim Hanlon from the Good Seats Still Available podcast. I got Dan Neumann from Hello Old Sports, and I got Harv Aronson from Total Sports Recall. And I'd like to start the show off this way. Give you each about 20 or 30 seconds to tell us a little bit about your podcast. And let's start off with you, Dan. Tell me a little bit about Hello Old Sports.
Hey, thanks, Warren. First of all, it's just a pleasure to do this. I've been a listener of yours and of Tim's, especially for, 8 or 9 years. So really thrilled to be doing this. My podcast is called Hello Old Sports. It's a show I do with my brother, Andrew. We're kind of a little bit of everything. We mostly focus on the big 3, and we pick a topic, and we could do anything from 19th century baseball, the 1890s Orioles to LeBron's Lakers and anything in between. We have a little bit of a New York focus because that's where we both grew up. Obviously as brothers, we'd have grown up in the same place, but really kind of anything and everything sports history from us.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thanks for being here and a part of this. Really thrilled to have you aboard. Tim, tell us a little bit about Good Seats Still Available.
Thanks, Warren, for having me. I appreciate it, guys. Welcome. I'm enjoying this already. And Good Seats Still Available is focused on what, quote unquote, used to be in professional sports. We've made that a hyphenated thing for about almost 10 years now. A subtitle, I guess, could be hot takes on dead and forgotten and defunct teams and stuff, right? So it's a niche of a niche, right? So this week's baseball reminiscence about, I don't know, the Boston Bees will be, last week's opining about a WFL franchise of the past. So it's a mixed bag of stuff, but it's all about stuff that's forgotten in closets and attics everywhere. And I don't know, we keep soldiering along 9+ years, and God bless. So there you go.
Awesome, awesome. It's a great podcast, and I enjoy listening to it as well. And finally,
Will, in a week or two, right? Because you're coming up. So hang in there.
yeah, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be a guest of yours. And Harv, tell us a little bit about Total Sports Recall.
So Total Sports Recall is all history. I consider myself a history buff, so I just look for historical topics. My byline is covering sports from a different angle with a Pittsburgh twist, because I'm from Pittsburgh. So here and there you'll hear some Pittsburgh stories, but basically just looking at the most interesting topics I can find dealing with sports history. And I consider myself a sports historian, so I thrive on this kind of stuff. And I appreciate you having me back on, Warren. Really really love being here.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun last time talking about Bill Mazeroski. Okay, so what we're going to do is today's format, we're going to do where each of us nominate a player for their respective Hall of Fame who has not been elected to their respective Hall of Fame. We'll each nominate one person, tell us why we think that person should be in the Hall, and then as a group we'll say, this is the one that's really been overlooked and should be in, only you can't choose the person you nominate. So if you nominate Pete Rose, Harv, if you nominate Pete Rose, you can't vote for Pete Rose. And, unfortunately, a lot of people can't vote for Pete Rose. On trial, I'm going to make a statement. One of you guys are going to argue for it. One of you are going to argue against it. And the other one will act as the judge. We're going to do a little bit of revisionist history. We each come up with a what if scenario, and sort of like, what if the ABA had never merged with the NBA? What would professional basketball look like today? And then finally, if we have some time, we'll do a couple of true-false questions. I'll make a statement, true or false, and you guys will take a guess as to whether or not it's true or false. But that's only if we have the time. So what I'd like to do is let's start off with who should be in the Hall of Fame and why. And Tim, I am putting you on the spot.
Jeez. As we record this, right, we're in the middle of the World Cup. And as listeners to our show know, I do obsess a little bit too much about soccer stuff, only because, as listeners know, I grew up in the 70s in the New York Cosmos. And it was a white hot comet moment of international superstars that brought soccer from this sort of foreign world into everybody's consciousness. And we're in the midst of the World Cup now, so I do have a bit of the World Cup fever. So I'm going to throw a name that actually you guys might even know, even if you're not soccer fans, which I'm assuming you're kind of probably met about, but that's okay. His name is Shep Messing.
Oh, the goalie.
Okay, so so I see some head nodding, and Warren even had an exasperation there. Shep Messing is synonymous with the early and mid 1970s. Certainly he became Pele's kind of ambassador, so to speak, during the mid 70s when he was when they were both with the Cosmos. But Shep has had a very interesting career elsewhere. He represented the United States on the national team in the early 70s when that wasn't a thing. He was in the midst of the Munich tragedy in 1972 when he was playing for the Olympic team. He was literally yards away from the atrocities that were happening, and he's a Harvard grad, but he was instrumental in bringing the Major Indoor Soccer League into being, which was completely not a thing. And he's just been an ambassador to the game ever since. He's also he's quite a personality, and I will leave you with this in terms of his influence on the game. He knew back in the day how to get publicity for the North American Soccer League by, wait for it, posing nude in Viva magazine in 1974, unbeknownst to his teammates or to his league. At the time was rankled a couple of feathers, but he got attention. And in New York, that's what you needed. And he knew all about it. He should be in the U.S. Soccer Hall of Fame. There's no question in my mind. Case closed.
Well, just based off of posing in those magazines, he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Not share those photos with you, but you can look them up, as they say.
All right, Harv, how about you? Who should be in the Hall of Fame and why?
This is an easy one for me. L.C. Greenwood, one of the key members of the Steel Curtain, and it's an atrocity that he's not in the Hall of Fame. So what I did today is I went back and looked at his stats, and he was a star in the Super Bowl. Super Bowl 9, 2 solo tackles. Super Bowl 10, 3 solo tackles. Then he went off in Super Bowl 13 with a sack and 5 solo tackles, and then 14 another solo tackle. But he was just as a key member as that defensive line then was Joe Green. So I said, well, I wonder what these two guys look like against each other. So I compared the two. The numbers aren't that far off. We see L.C. Greenwood played in 11 less games, and he had 78 sacks. Joe Green had 77. So he actually had more sacks than Joe Green. Joe Green's in the Hall of Fame. Joe Green, during his career, forced 2 fumbles. L.C. Greenwood forced 4. So the numbers are a little better. And fumble recovery, 16-14, two better for Joe Green. And year after year, they just keep passing him by. He lost that again this year by the senior committee. But he is definitely – and the crazy thing is that they got drafted in the same year. So they came in the same class. And L.C. Greenwood was drafted, I believe, in like the 3rd or 4th round, 10th round. I take that back. 10th round, 238 overall. And look how great of a player he turned out to be. He was a needle in a haystack. Definitely belongs in the Hall of Fame.
Great summary there. Okay, Dan, how about you?
So I went back quite a ways to the Negro Leagues and actually the pre-Negro League days to a right-handed fireballer by the name of Dick Cannonball Redding. And he has been considered for the Hall of Fame numerous times, most recently in the 2022 balloting that elected Buck O'Neil and Bud Fowler from the Negro Leagues. In the early 1970s, when the decision was first made to include, to start to induct Negro League players, an article in the New York Daily News listed 12 players that they felt would be leading candidates for inclusion. And those were Cool Papa Bell, Oscar Charleston, Ray Dandridge, Martin DeHigo, Josh Gibson, Monty Irvin, Judy Johnson, Buck Leonard, Pop Lloyd, Satchel Paige, Smokey Joe Williams, and the 12th was Dick Cannonball Redding. Redding is the only one who has not been elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame. No less an expert than Casey Stengel said, you can have Satchel Paige, I'll take Cannonball Redding. As difficult as it is sometimes to get fully accurate stats from the Negro Leagues, it is even more difficult to get fully accurate and complete stats from the pre-Negro League days, the days before 1920. But one estimate has Redding with a career one-loss record of 346 and 152 and a 38.8 WAR. And these statistics can always be, disputed based on what's counted and what's not. But even if we put aside the comparison to the white major leagues and we just look at the black leagues, Redding would be the only black baseball pitcher with a career WAR over 35 that has not been inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame.
I have a quick question about him because I know the rules were a little different back then. And I did a podcast a while back on a pitcher by the name of Jim McCormick. Mm-hmm. And McCormick also not in the Hall of Fame, and he had over 300 wins, had some crazy numbers, but they threw the ball underhanded. Was that at the time? Do you know if it was underhanded pitching at that time?
So Redding started in 1911 and was there until the 30s. So he was, by the time, he was well past that. I think it was 1893 that they moved the mound back to 60 foot 6 inches. So he was pitching under the current dimensions of the game.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. Mine, close to my heart. I recently finished writing a book about a hockey player by the name of Jim Nielsen. Nielsen was a defenseman for the New York Rangers, broke in 1962 and played until 1979, 17 years in the NHL, played with the Rangers and then with the phenomenon called the California Golden Seals, was a part of the Seals when they went to Cleveland for that disaster with the Cleveland Barons, and his final year was in the WHA with the Edmonton Oilers. Uh, Not in the Hall of Fame. He was the sixth player in the history of the NHL to play over 1,000 games. And there are one, two, three, four, several players that were elected to the Hall of Fame who had also defensemen who had fewer points than he did. A guy like Marcel Pronovo had 345 total points. Leo Boivin, 322. Jacques Laperriere, 282. Tom Johnson, 264. The main difference between those guys and Jim Nielsen, they all won a Stanley Cup. They were part of Stanley Cup winning teams. Nielsen never won a Stanley Cup. Overall, the 37th ranked defenseman for scoring. Guys that got in after him, Rod Langway, less points. Fernie Flaman got in 208 points, had, over 130 less points than him. But he won a Stanley Cup. And Nielsen, like I said, sixth player ever to play in 1,000 games, 17 years with the NHL, 12 with the Rangers, was top five Norris Trophy voting, but it was pretty tough to beat out Bobby Orr at that time. But again, never won a Stanley Cup. Of course, I could go much, much deeper into it. But the final thing is, he could have also gone in as a builder, being one of the first ever Native Americans, so to speak. He was part of the Cree Nation. Willie O'Ree is in the Hall of Fame as a builder, largely considered to be the first ever black man to play in the NHL. There was a gentleman by the name of Herb Carnegie who also made it into the Hall of Fame as a builder. He is considered by many to be the best black player to have never played in the NHL. And lastly, Lord Stanley is in the Hall of Fame. And the only thing that guy ever did was donate the top of the Stanley Cup. So, that is my argument, my quick argument for Jim Nielsen. So there we go. We have Shep Messing, Dick Cannonball Redding, L.C. Greenwood, and Jim Nielsen. And with that, let's just quickly take a vote. You can't vote for the guy that you nominated. So we'll go around the circle. And Tim, since you went first with Shep, who's your guy?
I think I'm biased from my childhood and experiences. I'm going to go with L.C. Greenwood, and I think I know why he hasn't been chosen, because it's almost like the whole damn team is that he played on is in there now. But I don't think that's his fault. It kind of is, but it's certainly not.
All right, so we got one for LC. Harv, how about you?
I got to go with Tim's Shep Messing because I grew up in the 70s and I clearly remember that name. As soon as he said the name, I was like, I know this guy. And I remember watching Pele as well. So, yeah, definitely Shep Messing was a great, great soccer player. And I'm not a huge soccer fan, but even as a distant fan of soccer, when you know somebody's name, that means he must have been that good.
And I actually went to a couple of those New York Aero indoor soccer games. How about you, Dan?
I'm going to go also with Greenwood. I think sometimes, whether it's the Packers of the 60s or these Steeler teams, when you got the Bears, even when you got a great defense, there's so many guys who can be inducted, be elected into the Hall of Fame, and eventually they all get in. It seems like I think there's 7 guys now from the Lombardi Packer defense, and how many, 5 or whatever from Pittsburgh. So I think Greenwood will get in one day, and he is my choice.
And
And it's tragic because he's not going to be around to see that day. That's what's the real sad thing. He should have been in years ago.
Yeah, that's the one thing I really don't like about some of these Hall of Fame elections. They wait till the guy has gone on before he gets his due respect. I too am going to go with L.C. Greenwood. I mean, the guy, I remember the Steel Curtain, Snow, Ham, uh, Mean Joe Green, L.C. Greenwood. You can't have one without the other. And I really like Dick Cannonball Redding too. And I've done a show on Oscar Charleston, largely regarded as perhaps one of the top 3 or 4 baseball players in the history of the game. And but for the purpose of today's sports tavern, L.C. Greenwood needs to be in the Hall of Fame. All right, good for you, Harv. Way to go. Okay, our next topic is going to be we're going to put a baseball player on trial, and his name is Chuck Klein. And when I discovered the things about Chuck Klein, I was pretty amazed that it took him so long to get into the Hall of Fame. And then I started to read more about it, and I sort of understood why there's so many people that say he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, and then you have those who say he should be in the Hall of Fame. And I think for today's episode, Harv is going to argue for the case of why Chuck Klein he is in the Hall of Fame and why he deserves to be there. And who is going to argue and say, yeah, you know what? He doesn't deserve to be there. Is that Dan?
I think that was going to be me. Yes, sir.
Okay. And then, Tim, you're going to make the final call. I'm just going to bring up a couple of background pieces on Chuck here. Chuck played in the major leagues, 1928 to 1933. He was on the Phillies. 34 to 36, he was on the Cubs and went back to the Phillies from 36 to 39. Played part of the year in 39 for the Pirates, and then was back at Philadelphia with the Phillies from 1940 to 44. His career numbers, played 17 years, 300 home runs exactly, 1,201 RBI, had a career batting average of 320. And he won a Triple Crown, won an MVP, had 170 RBI in 1930 and didn't lead the National League because Hack Wilson had 191, the major league record that year. But there's some really interesting information about Chuck. I'm going to sit back and listen to you guys. Go for it, Harv. Why should Chuck Klein be in the Hall? He was elected. Why does he deserve? Why does he deserve his induction?
Well, there's a couple of ways to think about this, I think. And if you look at now, more recent years, guys that are being voted into Hall of Fame, and I always say to myself, are they really the greatest of the great? That's who belongs in the Hall of Fame. So I said, looking at Chuck Klein, let me do it this way. I took six of the greatest players in history and compared their stats against Chuck Klein's and then averaged them out per season. So I took Ted Williams, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Stan Musial, Ty Cobb, Joe DiMaggio. I mean, those are 6 undeniable Hall of Famers. And when I round out their numbers, average per season, Chuck Klein's not that far behind. I mean, Ted Williams was a 344 hitter, Babe Ruth 342 for a career, 340 for Lou Gehrig, 331, Musial, 366 for Cobb, and 325 for DiMaggio. Well, DiMaggio is one of the best players ever, and Klein's right there with him, 320. So the numbers are really comparable. And if he can sit in that kind of neighborhood there with the 6 other great players with close numbers, then absolutely he should belong in a Hall of Fame. Now, I also looked at his career stats, and they bowled them out in Sports Reference when he's leading the league. He led the league in a lot of categories a lot of times. Games played per season, 3 straight years leading the league in runs scored. He led the league in doubles twice. And then in home runs, he led the league 4 times, twice in RBIs, once in stolen bases. He led the league in hitting, 368, 1933. He was in the MVP voting 4 times, 5 times, and he won it once. He was second once, won it once, second twice. He was always in it, all-star year after year. I mean, his numbers really, for me, stack up to what qualifies what I believe should be a Hall of Famer. And when you roll off the names of some of these great players, most historians will know who Chuck Klein is. And so just being able to say his name among some of these other greats, I think he's deserved to be in the Hall of Fame.
Dan?
Well, let me just sort of start off by saying I don't hate the selection of Chuck Klein to the Hall of Fame. I think there are others that are more egregious, Lloyd Wayner or what's the guy, the McCarthy from the 1890s Boston National League team. I think it's Tommy McCarthy. There are outfielders in the Hall of Fame that have worse resumes than Chuck Klein, but I would sort of turn on its head one of the points that Harv made about the 6 seasons. In a lot of ways, that's really all he had. By 1934, when he goes to the Chicago Cubs, he's kind of sort of getting to the tail end of his career and would never, after 34, his first year in Chicago, he would never be an all-star team again. He would never really lead the league in any meaningful categories again. It really is a question of 6 solid seasons for Chuck Klein. He played in an era where offensive baseball, especially power baseball, was at the highest level that it would be, with the possible exception of the late 1990s and the steroid era. Perhaps his greatest year was that 1930. Well, no, he was better in another year, but 1930, which was one of his best years, is widely regarded as the biggest year for power and offensive baseball in the history of Major League Baseball. There's a stat called Jaws, which is by a baseball historian and analyst named Jay Jaffe, where it's his effort to normalize war, and he does it by position to determine whether somebody is deserving of being in the Hall of Fame. And Chuck Klein is 32nd all time in Jaws for right fielders, and he's behind names like Brian Giles, Bobby Bonds, Reggie Smith, probably individuals that nobody would ever consider to be even worthy of considering for the Hall of Fame. And then there's the whole sort of idea of the Baker Ball, which was the home field of the Philadelphia Phillies in the year that Klein was there. It was only 280 feet to right field and just about 300 to right center, Klein being a left-handed hitter. 131 home runs and 469 RBI in his years with the Phillies. This is 131 home runs and 469 RBIs at Baker Bowl, while hitting just 60 home runs and 259 RBI in road games. So he's at very roughly half in both categories. And I also think that in any sport, winning matters to a certain degree. If you're going to take a guy who's got a short career, who's maybe got some of these other asterisks, like, an advantage at his home field, you maybe need a big moment. You need a big pennant race. You need a Gabby Hartnett homer in the Glowman type of thing. And Klein doesn't really have any of those. He played in a World Series with the Cubs, didn't win it. I'm not saying that we should elect Bobby Thompson to the Hall of Fame based on one home run, but when there are strong arguments on both sides, I don't think it's wrong to look at, did this guy have a big moment, big postseason, anything like that? And Chuck Klein doesn't. So again, I don't hate the selection of Chuck Klein. There are others based on the statistics that I would remove first, but I think I can make a strong argument against.
I'm gonna chime in a little bit here, Tim, before you make your call. I'm going to argue a little bit here with Dan about the 280 feet down the right field line, but the wall was 60 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
The right field wall was 60 feet tall, and again, 280 feet. And what I find interesting is that is a huge argument with the naysayers as to why Chuck Klein should not be in the Hall of Fame is because it was only 280 feet, and he hit so many of his home runs to right and right center field. But they don't hold that against the players who played on the Yankees, and never going to say Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But Yankee Stadium was only 314 down the line. The Polo Grounds, Mel Ott, it was only 258 feet down the right field line. And Fenway, when you go the opposite way, left field, we don't say much about Ted Williams, 310 feet with a 37-foot wall. So while I don't disagree with the argument of 280 feet, but why is that more penalized? Why is Klein more penalized for that as opposed to the other guys who also had short porches? The Hall of Fame argument, or the being on a winning team argument, that's sort of what I just went through with my nomination of Jim Nielsen to the Hall of Fame. Jim Nielsen was never part of a championship team. Chuck Klein was never part of a championship team. But guys who had compiled less of a career are elected, but guys who never won aren't elected. So that's a strange one. And I will say, you say he never had his moment. He actually had one huge moment. He hit 4 home runs in one game and almost hit a fifth. The story is the ball was one of these that was at the fence and the guy hauled it back in. So I sort of support some of your argument, Dan. And as far as Harv is concerned, the number that I find absolutely crazy, that to me is the one that should get you into the Hall of Fame, are his total bases. His total bases, 1929, he had 405. He did not lead the league. But 1930, 31, 32, and 33, he led the National League in total bases, 445, 347, 420, and 365. Out of the top 10 seasons to lead your league in total bases, only 2 players appear on that list twice. Twice Chuck Klein led the National League in total bases. Twice Lou Gehrig led the American League in total bases. And go and do yourself a favor and take a look at the guys who are not on that list. It's absolutely amazing. So, but again, I'm going to go back to Dan. He only had 6, 7 really phenomenal years. But those phenomenal years, I mean, he had a Triple Crown win. He had 170 RBI one season, 145 RBI one season. And here's a stat that so many people overlook. It's a defensive metric stat. He holds the modern day record for most assists by an outfielder in one single season. He did it with 44 in 1930, and that followed 41 in 1929. So, does he deserve to be in the Hall of Fame? Does he not deserve? One last thing, just an interesting aside. It's so interesting to me that he actually did wind up with the Phillies. He was actually in the Cardinals minor league system, but the Cardinals broke a rule. They had 2 teams in the same league, and you're not allowed to do that. They had a team in Fort Wayne and they had a team in Dayton. And the commissioner said, sorry, guys, you're penalized. You have to sell all your players. So the Cardinals lost out and had to sell their players. And so there was a bidding war on Chuck Klein, and the Phillies outbid the Yankees for the services of Chuck Klein. Phillies bid $7,500. The Yankees did $5,000. So the Yankees could have actually had Klein, Ruth, and Gehrig all at the same time. That would have been something. So with that, there's certainly great argument there made by Dan, great argument made there by Harv. But now we need to go to the judge, Tim Hanlon.
Here comes
What say you?
All rise. Here comes the judge. Well, look, I think all of you guys have both exhaustively kind of gone through all the stats and stuff. I think the two negative dings against his career have been definitely talked about here. The hyper offensive 1930s, right? 1930, for example, he drove in was it 170 runs? I think the entire National League around that time as a group, I think batted around 300, maybe a 303, something like that. So he was definitely part of a genre of hitters and stuff. So there's a bit of grade inflation there, but it still doesn't mean he wasn't contributing on his own stats, right? So I think that's kind of a wash. I think the other real thing is this Baker Bowl effect, but again, I'm not sure that's his fault, right? I mean, it's not, he didn't build the facility, right? The miserly owner of the Phillies back in the day even built a fence to kind of prevent more home runs because he was sick and tired of complaints, apparently, of the balls going over the fence and hitting cars and that kind of stuff, right? Clearly, promotion was not in his veins, but because that's a good thing, people come to see the ball get hit out of the park. That's not his fault. And by the way, other people got to play in Baker Bowl too. He wasn't the only one, right? So he just got good at exploiting that advantage. But I totally understand and agree that his career, even though it was 17 years or so, was more concentrated in those early years. I just think it's kind of hard when you look at the stats, and to me, the stats kind of speak for themselves. And I agree that the 4 home runs in a game certainly is an illuminating memory that is indelible. I'm surprised it took kind of as long as it did, but I think that the wise decision was made. I think he indeed does deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. Now, that said, I think there are plenty of others who also deserve it too, that aren't in, and we can save that for another episode. But well defended and well argued, guys. But I think I have to tip my hat to Cooperstown on this one. I think they got this right.
Fair enough.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks. It's a fun thing to do this kind of stuff. It's, we look back at all these numbers and all these guys, and we think of some of the guys that have been elected into the Hall of Fame, recently, who we think should be or should not be in the Hall of Fame. And I always go back to the one. I mean, I had a college buddy at the time. I was a huge Darryl Strawberry fan, and I think Darryl Strawberry was certainly on a Hall of Fame trajectory, and then he blew it, and he's not in there, and I don't think he deserves to be in there. And my bud's favorite player was Harold Baines, and I look at the Harold Baines argument, and maybe we should have put Harold Baines on trial because I'm just not sure that Harold Baines is in the same class as a lot of these other Hall of Famers. So there you go.
I'm going to add one thing here. That I do think there's a recency bias, and I do think that most Halls of Fame are recognizing that, and I think can maybe kind of think a little bit more astutely about sort of what qualifies. But I will say this, and this popped into my head when you mentioned Nielsen for the hockey one, right? At the end of the day, I honestly think that charisma and style beyond the statistics does play a role in it. And there is something to be said for the Shep Messings of the world, right? Where statistically, he was relatively strong, but you can't deny that he had a contribution of lasting memory for folks who were huge fans and even who weren't, right? I think what most Halls of Fame, and I've only learned this in the last number of years doing this show, is that the historical contributions that these players, these builders, these founders, these visionaries, whatever, make, I think go beyond the stats line. I think stats very important, and probably early on was pretty much the benchmark for should somebody be in or not. But I think you want to have to step back, and frankly, you need some years of to accrue to kind of really understand what's the legacy of these people. How much did they contribute? How did they stand out? And if they weren't part of a book of history about the sport, would it be lacking? And I think that's kind of also to me, that kind of is just as important, if not more so, beyond the stats. And I'm not sure all the various halls of fame have calibrated for that effect yet, but that would be my sort of tiebreaker if anybody's asking.
Well, just to continue on what you said, that was part of the Nielsen argument, is what he had to overcome to make it to the NHL. When he was just around 5 years old, his mother left. His father was a mink rancher. And in order to succeed at his job, he had to leave the family for quite some period of time throughout the year. And he could not raise Jim on his own. And Jim had two younger sisters. And the father picked all three of them up and dropped them off at an orphanage. And that's where Jim and his two younger sisters were raised. And from there, he was able to figure out a way to make something of his life. And at the time, it was a very, very turbulent time. If you were of Indian heritage, you were taken away from your family and put into residential schools. And some of the horrors that those guys and those gals faced during their times in residential schools are awful. And in a way, being placed in an orphanage saved Jim from some of those atrocities that took place as late as 1997 or 1996. The Canadian government had a division of Indian Affairs, and they were still taking children away from their families. So, and Jim overcame all that and made his way. Never ever, the first ever NHL game that Jim Nielsen ever saw was the first one he ever played in. And, you know, when you live in Canada, when you grew up in Canada and you make it to the NHL and you've never seen an NHL game, that's saying a lot. But great argument, guys. A lot of fun here. Let's move on to our next segment. What if? I think this is going to be really fun, a little revisionist history. And for this one, I'd like to start with Tim. Tim, what if? Give us a great what if.
I'm sorry to hang on soccer too much, but it is the World Cup. And I, a lot of people outside of fandom of the sport in the United States don't recognize that in 1982, we had the chance to host the World Cup. It was a situation where Colombia had gotten awarded the competition. Was it 82, 86? I'm sorry, 86. And the scenario was they kind of blew it for a bunch of different reasons, from technical matters and that kind of stuff. And there was the North American Soccer League was wobbling very violently at that time in the early 80s. There was a heroic and Herculean effort by people like Henry Kissinger and others in the soccer community to rally around this and get it. And I think, frankly, it was kind of the last ditch effort to kind of help sort of stabilize what was starting to the balloon was starting to kind of collapse a bit as the 80s dawned and the economic pressures were getting at the North American Soccer League. So my big what if is, what if the United States had somehow gotten the 1986 World Cup? You could make a very strong argument that those wobbly years from 82 to 85, when it ultimately died, would have been propped up by the anticipation and the halo effect of a rejuvenated interest in the sport, and perhaps could have kept it from dying, shall we say, and going to only indoors for the next 10, 15 years and going into a desert, if you will, of nothingness until 1990.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the anticipation and the build up to a World Cup, and you had the NASL at that time, like you were saying, might have been a lot more interest, and we might not have an MLS today. It might still be the NASL. Absolutely. All right, Harv, what if?
Okay, before I get to the one if, I just want to say one thing to Tim. My college classmate at Slippery Rock State College. He turned out to be the director of Western Pennsylvania soccer. He's been on my show. I interviewed him a couple of years ago, but he leads the whole Western Pennsylvania Soccer Association over there, from youth all the way up to young adults. So it's pretty neat. My what if is easy for me because it deals with my boyhood hero, tragic story, of course, Roberto Clemente. What if he didn't board the plane that day? Does his career go on? How much longer does he play? But the interesting twist to this story is it involves somebody else, because not only that day, December 31st, 1972, did we lose a life, but Roberto Clemente actually inadvertently saved a life. You guys may not know this story or not, but Tom Walker used to play baseball. Very good friend of Roberto Clemente. So he goes to Clemente that day and says, I want to come with you, help you. I feel for these people as well. And Clemente said, no, it's New Year's Eve. Go home, enjoy your family, and have a nice New Year's Eve. Had he got on that plane, he would not have survived either. And so there would be no Neil Walker, who is his son. Oh. So in a way, Roberto, we tragically lost him, but he saved Tom Walker's life. So it's very, very interesting. And the crazy thing is, I found out in doing the research today that Tom is the brother-in-law of Chip Lang, who played for the Montreal Expos. Chip Lang graduated from my high school about 2 or 3 years before me. I said, wow, that's an interesting twist. I mean, my sister knew Chip Lang. He played professional baseball, and he's the brother-in-law of Tom Walker, who would not be here today if he got on that plane.
That's a good one too. That's really good. Nicely done, Harv. How about you, Dan? What if?
So mine involves somebody passing away, but not quite so prematurely. My question is, what if Vince Lombardi had not passed away after the 1969 NFL season, or I guess just prior to the 1970 season, and had been able to remain and coach the Washington Redskins for the next several years? Would he have become the first, and to this date only, coach ever to win a Super Bowl with two different NFL teams? Would he have challenged the budding dynasty of the Pittsburgh Steelers? We've never had a situation in the NFL, and to my knowledge, and maybe that I can think of even in other sports, but it's particularly in the NFL, where you had the coach of a previous dynasty going on and having significant success challenging another dynasty. Would it have been in the NFC, would the main powers have been Lombardi and Landry throughout the 70s? And would that have been a storyline? These two guys who got their start together with the New York Giants in the 1950s, now facing off against each other in for NFC supremacy. What would that have meant for the Vikings? Would we have gotten a Lombardi versus Knoll Super Bowl? Two great Hall of Fame coaches. I actually looked it up. I didn't know this before today, but actually in Lombardi's 1 year in Washington, he actually did play a single game against the Steelers, against Chuck Knoll, and lost. So, or actually, I think they won. The Redskins won. The Steelers lost. What would it have meant, not just for his own legacy, but if Vince Lombardi would have remained a powerhouse? Now, Lombardi joined a team in Green Bay with 7 or 8 eventual Hall of Famers already on the roster in 1959. You could argue that he made some of those guys into Hall of Famers, but the Redskins roster that he picked up in 1969 definitely does not have 7 or 8 Hall of Famers, and he needed a quarterback. Sonny Jurgensen was 35, so he wasn't going to be his quarterback of the future to take him to multiple Super Bowls. That all being said, it was very interesting to think about how that 1970s in the NFL, which is the story of Dallas, Pittsburgh, Miami, Oakland, how would Vince Lombardi and the Redskins have fit into all of that?
That's awesome. That's a great what if too. Wow, you guys have really come up with some great ones. My what if, I struggled with it because I had 3. One was what I had suggested up front when we first when I talked about it. What would have happened had the ABA not merged with the NBA? What would professional basketball look like? I mean, would there still be a Kentucky Colonels, one of the teams that probably should have merged with the NBA. The other one is always a favorite of mine. What if New York Giants management had listened to Bill Parcells and instead of drafting in the supplemental draft, taking Gary Zimmerman, what if they listened to Parcells and with the third pick in the supplemental draft, they would have taken Reggie White? You would have had Reggie White and Lawrence Taylor on the same team in the prime of their careers. It would have been crazy. But I didn't go with the ABA, NBA. I didn't go with Reggie White, Bill Parcells, and Lawrence Taylor. I went with Babe Ruth. What if Harry Frazee didn't need some money to fund his play No No Nanette? He would have never sold Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees for $100,000. And Babe Ruth would have remained with the Boston Red Sox. How would that have changed baseball? What if Babe Ruth stayed with the Boston Red Sox? And, I obviously did a little research. Ruth played for the Red Sox from 1914 to 1919. They won the World Series in 1918, right? Actually, they won the World Series in 1915. They didn't win it again until 2004, right? They won 15, 16, 17, didn't win it again until 2004. He was there for 5 seasons. And in that time, he had 49 homers, 224 ribbies, hit 308. Was a heck of a starting pitcher. 89 wins, 46 losses, a 2.19 ERA. Babe Ruth was phenomenal. But like I said, after they sold Ruth to the Yankees, they appeared in a couple of World Series, but they didn't win again. The Yankees, on the other hand, they were not a very good team before Babe Ruth got to them. And I had it marked down here. But Ruth, the first year he was with the Yankees, they went 95 and 39 and finished in third place. And then the Yankees took off. They finished in first in 1921, 22, 23, 26, 27, 28. The Red Sox, after Ruth left, went fifth, last, seventh, and last. Absolutely crazy. His first year with the Yankees, 54 home runs, 135 RBI, and hit 376. I mean, it is just amazing how this actually changed the course of baseball. Would the Yankees have gotten better without Ruth? I think so. I mean, they still had Bob Musial, Joe Dugan, Lou Gehrig, Earl Combs, Tony Lazzeri, Mark Koenig, Bill Dickey. They came and went over the years. Their pitching still had Herb Pennock, Wade Hoyt, Carl Mays, Bob Shockey. I mean, the pitching wouldn't have been affected. But would the Yankees have been the New York Yankees as we know them today, and would the Boston Red Sox sort of replace them with Babe Ruth in the lineup? Would the Red Sox have been that dynastic team throughout the 1920s with Babe Ruth in the lineup? How would that have changed the course of baseball history? So I've always wondered that, and I thought, wow, this would be a great time to bring that up.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Would Ruth have been Ruth, right? I mean, he hit 29 home runs in 1919 and then all the way up to 54 in 1920. How much of that increase was just his natural progression as a hitter, as a player, and how much of that was, obviously Babe Ruth and New York in the 1920s were a perfect match, and he was probably in some ways energized by that. So it's probably some of both, but would he have been the dominant Ruth had he stayed in Boston?
You wouldn't have had the house that Ruth built either.
Yeah.
Certainly true.
Some of this is also the New York effect, right? I mean, it's like it still lives on today in pro sports, right? I mean, Giannis is a wunderkind on the basketball court, but the day he becomes a New York Knick, potentially.
We don't want him. We're good. We don't need anybody new. We don't want him.
Fair enough. But my point is that New York is New York, right? And if Sinatra's not being trite when he says if you can make it here, I mean, but it's otherworldly, right? Logical or not, right? It just brings hotter, whiter spotlight if you're that good, and even if you're like okay, you can be led to grander heights, right? So I don't know. There's probably a bit of that effect. It's certainly in hindsight for sure. But again, I think money troubles were still money troubles even after selling Babe Ruth in Boston, right? So, I'm not sure that Ruth would have been able to carry on all that much longer by himself without a surrounding cast I'm not sure he would have been able to soldier on and make that team such a dynastic force that the Yankees ultimately became.
Yeah.
Babe Ruth curse.
Yeah, there would have been no curse. There are a lot of different things. I mean, you think of the course, how if Babe Ruth had stayed with the Red Sox, how history would have changed baseball. It wouldn't be the same as it is today. It really wouldn't. So, we got just a couple minutes left. So I got a couple true false questions for you guys. Just some fun to wrap up today's show. True or false? In the 1961-62 NBA season, Wilt Chamberlain averaged 50.4 points per game. True or false? Wilt
Absolutely true.
Won the MVP.
Absolutely true.
We got a true from Harv.
True.
We got a true from Tim.
The question is whether he won the MVP.
Correct.
No, Russell won it in 62.
That's exactly right.
Oh,
It's
I thought you were.
crazy to think.
I thought your
Russell-
question was 50
yeah.
points.
Okay, so Wilt averaged 50.4 points per game and 25.7 rebounds per game. Russell averaged 18.9 points per game and only 23.6 rebounds per game. And he dominated the MVP vote. He had 297 votes to Wilt's 152.
Why was that?
I think it's the championship factor. I think that Russell was part of a team that was just so dominant, and that was they were on their way to winning 9 championships, 8 in a row or something, 9 out of 10 years. It was just a crazy thing.
Russell said in an interview years later that when the players would vote, which was like in the early 60s, that was when he would win them. And then when they changed the rules to where I guess it was the writers, I don't know who voted next, that was when Wilt started winning. I never looked up the veracity of that, but that was what Russell said.
Well, and Chamberlain won at that point, like when he finally did start to win, he won 3 or 4.
Yeah, like 4 and 5 years or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. True or false? There is a team that drafted 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks in the same draft. True or false?
Can you at least give us a decade?
When they were drafted, if it's true or false, let's say the 1970s. One team drafted 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks in the same draft.
Would it have been the Raiders?
Is it a true or false question? It's a true or false.
No.
I'm going to say false. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Harv. Go ahead.
I was going to say true because I was thinking Daryl LaMonica and Ken Stabler.
I'm going to say false just because I can't. LaMonica's not in the Hall of Fame, so I'm not sure.
Not? I thought he was.
I'm not sure who it would be, so I'm going to say false.
Oh, I'm thinking of Jim Plunkett. Never mind.
I'm going to say true only because that person probably didn't become the star that they didn't become stars all at the same time. So that's yeah. I'll tell you who.
In 1979, the answer is true. In 1979, the Kansas City Royals drafted Dan Marino with the 99th pick in the 4th round of the baseball draft. And in the 18th round with the 463rd pick, they drafted outfielder John Elway.
Trick question.
Wow.
It's awesome. And it was 1979, so it was well before, a couple years before they were drafted in the NFL. Last one, another NFL question. No kicker has ever won the NFL MVP award. True or false?
That's false.
Harv?
Oh, I'm being tripped up by Dan's response. He's very confident about it. I was going to say false. I mean, I was going to say true, but hearing Dan just now how confident he is, I have a feeling I'm wrong.
Repeat the
question. No kicker has ever won the NFL MVP award.
False.
It is false. In 1982, in the strike-shortened season, Mark Mosley won the NFL MVP.
Wasn't Blanda or.
Well, guys, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you all taking some time out of your evening to join me, despite the little hiccup we had with our little technical hiccup at the start of the show. But I think I had a lot of fun, and I hope you guys would consider coming back again. I'd like to do this a couple times, 2 times a year. And thanks for being a part of the first ever Sports Forgotten Heroes Sports Tavern. Tim Hanlon, thank you. Harv Aronson, thank you. Dan Neumann, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
I had a blast. I want to do it again.
Absolutely. This was great. Thank you, Warren.
Awesome. See you guys around.
All right. Take care now.
Thank you all for tuning in today. This was a lot of fun, and like you, I learned a lot. Dan's case for Dick Cannonball Redding to be elected into baseball's Hall of Fame, Tim's passion for soccer, and his case for Shep Messing, and of course Harv and his love for everything Pittsburgh. I hope you enjoyed today's show, and when I come back again in a couple of months with a new episode of the Sports Tavern, I'll have a few new surprises for you. Thanks again to my guest today, Dan Neumann from Hello Old Sports, Tim Hanlon from Good Seeds Still Available, and Harv Aronson from Total Sports Recall. And thanks to all of you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.